Hello. Our title today is Unreasonable. What is within reason and what is unreasonable is based upon the person doing the reasoning. We read our New Testament, we have to understand that the one doing the reasoning is Jesus. He is the righteous judge, he's the final say so. He is the king of us servants and the father of us children. So, when we're looking at unreasonable, really think about the text we've been covering in Luke 6 and contemplate the fact what is reasonable and unreasonable for real, not what we think or what we feel. Last week, I used the Genesis account and Matthew 6 both to show how chasing the second best is the best way to forsake God and his best. Look at Adam and Eve and chasing for that fruit in the garden. Jesus made it emphatically clear by repeating himself, you cannot serve both God and mammon. You have to pick one. If you think you're going to do both, then really you're just doing one and pretending to serve the other, which is what the context says there in Matthew 6. Now, this week, I want to turn back to Genesis and look at the results of this fall, and maybe possibly use another example in Matthew 6 to give us a carryover. The first family discovered what all humanity will suffer: rebellious enmity between each other. And it stays to this day. Even brothers in that situation, Cain and Abel. Now, what was the problem? It was a sacrifice and then jealous rage because insecurities within the two. There's a lot to that contextually. That's not the purpose this morning. But why did it happen? Something else has to be asked. Why did Cain pop this attitude so fast and so furiously his brother and then seek revenge? And that's the key to our context. Interpersonal relationships are God's top priority. And yet modern Christians do not make this a priority. They're isolated. They're sold off just to their families or their friends or their units. People are a checklist today. People are an uncomfortable reality that we have to put up with while we do our God thing. People are annoying and they slow us down. Then people are not loved, at least agape love. That doesn't mean conditional or unconditional. That doesn't mean we're going through this issue of a sacrifice, self-sacrifice, or sacrificing for others. It's just flat out, I want my way. And there is the core of what happened in the garden. Selfish pride ensued, and it hasn't stopped. This issue of rebellion because there's an issue in the relationship with God and therefore with others. It's the opposite of the great commandment and the second great commandment. Love God first, love others second. That's the exact order he gave it in. And so the second is going to be affected by the first. If we have a problem with God, we're going to have a problem with others. And that was Cain's issue. This issue of now I've got to get mad and I've got to retaliate and I've got to seek revenge on this. That is the context of Luke 6, 27 through 38. In there, we see Jesus teaching on how to be children of our Father. As his children, he expects us to act like him. Jesus demonstrated each and every one of these things that we read today. He lived a life in agreement with how his Father relates with others and how he relates to Christ. As Jesus even said in John 17, they may be one as we are one. That's his desire. That's his priority. What is that exactly? This relating to other people. Well, one is the treatment of others. We're going to start reading our scripture here in verse 27. But I say unto you which hear, love your enemies, do good to them which hate you. Now see, immediately that sounds unreasonable, but it's not. Who's doing the reasoning here? Jesus said, but I say unto you which hear, so are you listening? Love your enemies. That's point number one. There's an issue. The treatment of others. Cain saw Abel as an enemy because of the issue of this offering, and so he retaliated against him out of hate instead of love. We're not to hate our enemies, we're to love our enemies because they're an eternal soul and they matter more than what they're doing or what they said. Love your enemies. Do good to them that hate you. Do what? Yeah, do good to them that hate you. There's a whole process of that about heaping coals of fire on their head and that God will get the better result. There's a lot of proverbs that stick in there, but that's not our point today. Let's get through these verses. Verse 28 says, bless them which curse you and pray for them which despitefully use you. So if somebody's despitefully using you, what do? You pray for them. If somebody has cursed you or your name, what do? You bless them. And if somebody has been an enemy to you and they're hating on you, what do? You do good to them. That, again, humanly, that sounds totally unreasonable. But isn't this exactly what Jesus did to those that did those things to him? So in other words, it can be done. Verse 29 says, and unto him that smiteth thee on one cheek, offer also the other. This is a famous one quoted constantly. Turn the other cheek. So let him hit the other side. And him that taketh away thy cloak, forbid not to take thy coat also. So that is ridiculous. That is unreasonable. Yeah, it's not nice, and it's, we would say wrong, stolen, bullied. But the fact of the matter is, Jesus said, do it. Remember verse 46 through 49? You don't just hear, but you hear and do. Give to every man. He broadens it, verse 30. Every man that asketh thee, and of him that taketh away thy goods, ask them not again. If someone says, hey, can I borrow some money? Sure. Well, that person's not trustworthy. Do you think the $5, the $50, the $500 that God can't pay you back, which by the way is in this text? Of course he can. So just obey and let God deal with it. It's on them. Say, well, if you give it to them, they're going to use it for the wrong thing. That's on them. I'm going to do what God told me to do, and they got to pay the penalty for that, not me. Jesus isn't saying that we should throw out our justice system here. In fact, he is the just judge. But we shouldn't return fire with fire. That's the key to this entire text. We shouldn't return fire with fire. Fight fire with fire is not at all what God wants us to do. That's exactly what Cain did to Abel. We should slap for being slapped. That's wrong. Let him deal with it. It's also imperative that we understand that the gospel and the cause of Christ is at stake here. That's the context of this text, not our little perfect world that we're living in, like for instance here in North America. But the fact of the matter is, this was a situation of if I acted the wrong way, then I'm acting just like everybody else, and nobody's going to hear the gospel from me, and I inadvertently could be a stumbling block and or send people to a devil's hell. That's an issue. It could hurt the cause of Christ. We hurt the cause of Christ and we affect the gospel negatively when we get in the mud with the world and those acting like the world and act just like them. Stay out of the mud, stay above the fray. That's the easy answer to these texts. Someday, the ones who aren't kind, aren't loving, aren't positive, aren't grace givers will face the righteous judge who will avenge us. He promises it. The issue is, do you trust him or not? Are you going to be the God in the situation and take matters in your own hands, or are you going to let God do it? As we said last week in Genesis, we're looking at Adam and Eve. You'll be as gods. Man is still a problem. People want to control everything about their life. We are not to return fire. Paul said that in Romans 12:19. Dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves. Straight up truth. Avenge not yourselves, but rather give place unto wrath. Let it roll. What? That's unreasonable. Again, maybe we're reasoning wrong. Maybe we're thinking like the world and being carnal and not thinking spiritual like Christ. After all, he's the one that said it. Now he sent his apostle to say it, Romans 12:19. Give place unto wrath. And here's why. For it is written, so he's quoting the Old Testament, vengeance is mine. I will repay, saith the Lord. He said, that's in my box. You're not to do this. I will do this. Our attitude towards our real life enemies in this flesh must change. There's people at work, yes. There's folks that you know, there's family, there's issues that, man, people are really worried about the government right now. We have real life enemies in the flesh, and our attitude towards them must change. When this boils down to it, it's not just the actions that we're seeing in this text, it's the attitude behind those actions. Why wouldn't we love those people even though they're unloving to us? Well, that's unreasonable. If Jesus didn't do that, you and I would still need a Savior. He was loving and careful to those who did him the worst. It was his attitudes towards his enemies. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. We need to have the mind of Christ about people. He didn't want to hurt or fight them. Instead, he wanted to love them and save them and show them his miraculous, supernatural kindness. Unfortunately, that kindness is only seen best when it's being abused. And that's why the counsel he gives us here. The second thing we see in our text starts up in verse 31, giving the gift of kindness. And as ye would that men should do to you, do ye also to them likewise. The things you would want somebody to do to you, do it to them first. Well, people are not kind today. Then be kind. They give no grace, then give grace. They're very unloving, very short with me. Well, then be loving and give them space. This should knock us off our complacency and into a world who desperately needs God's kindness in a tangible way. Not a message, but something they can see and touch. You see, we are that tangible kindness they need. And if we don't obey this text, they may not ever hear our gospel. We may be the only element of kindness they ever feel. My wife works as a teacher's assistant, as an aide at a local school here, small school, small kids. I can't tell you how many times I've gone to take her lunch or drop her off in the mornings, pick her up, or been around things, and you see some of the conditions of the families and the kids, and it's heartbreaking. You see the harshness that some of these moms and dads are saying to their kids. Really, they're fathers and mothers more than mommies and daddies. You see the brokenness and the emptiness in the eyes of these children at such a young age. You know, folks, we may be the only element of kindness that child ever sees. We may be the only element of kindness and love that they ever feel. We are the tangible hands and feet of Christ. We must obey this text. There's eternal consequences at stake. The third thing we see in this text, starting in verse 32, people's actions and reactions are no excuse to our giving kindness or not. Verse 32 says, for if ye love them which love you, what thank have you? For sinners also love those that love them. And if you do good to them which do good to you, what thank have you? For sinners also do even the same. And if you lend to them of whom ye have hope to receive, what thank have you? For sinners also lend to sinners to receive as much gain. But love your enemies and do good and lend, hoping for nothing again. And your reward shall be great, and ye shall be the children of the highest, for he is kind unto the unthankful and to the evil. And again, there's the key, the fact that we will be known as the children of the highest, that we're different than everyone else, because there's something about us that gives kindness and love and lends and cares and is tangibly there for people. We're not aloof. We're not separated. We're not hiding in our houses. We're not too busy, because we love. Our Heavenly Father will reward us in such a way to outweigh any personal loss of this temporary earth. Now, Peter reminds of this later. Jesus demonstrated this for him right there, and Peter reminds the people that he wrote the Bible to, 1 Peter 2, 20, 21, for what glory is it if when ye are buffeted for your faults, ye shall take it patiently? But if when ye do well and suffer for it, ye take it patiently, this is acceptable with God. For even hereunto were ye called, because Christ also suffered for us, leaving us an example that ye should follow his steps. You see, following in Jesus' steps means being able to forgive your enemies, like he did on the cross. To take it. Just take it, because the cause is greater than your temporary issue. He does so, Jesus does, out of a heart of mercy, because he loves, because he is mercy. That brings to our fourth point, starting 36. Give the gift of mercy. Be therefore merciful as your Father also is merciful. When we are merciful, we won't judge people. We're merciful, we won't condemn others. We're merciful, we won't hold on to things and remember it against people. That's the fifth point. When we are merciful, it changes the way we relate to people then. Bring us full circle back to the beginning of this text. It's about these interpersonal relationships. Verse 37 says, judge not, and you shall not be judged. Condemn not, and you shall not be condemned. Forgive, and you shall be forgiven. Give, and it shall be given unto you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, shall men give unto your bosom. For with the same measure that ye meet withal, shall it be measured to you again. I love that text. We have no idea when or by what means he will do his blessing to us, but we know that he will bless our lives. He will, and you can take that to the bank because he promised. The only way to receive this, though, is by participating. It's like nothing you have ever seen before. Jesus gave us a parable to illustrate this in 39 through 45. The word parable is a parabole and means to throw alongside. Jesus is interjecting a real-life illustration so that we can see how practical this is, how ridiculous we look when we don't obey. So we're talking about unreasonable. Look at how unreasonable it is when we don't obey these things. You see, if you don't do what these verses said up to this point, to verse 38, then you really do look silly. You just don't know it. See, verse 39 says, and he spake a parable unto them, can the blind lead the blind? Shall they not both fall into the ditch? It's absolute perfect sense. The disciple then, he says in verse 40, is not above his master, but every one that is perfect shall be as his master. If we want a kinder, gentler, and more loving world, shouldn't it start with us? Have our eyes open to this truth and start practicing it? Otherwise, we're going to fall right in the same ditch everybody else is. If we fight back with fire with fire, won't we both be sunk or burnt in that situation? Shouldn't we allow our master to fight the fights that only he can win? Now, really and truly, are you going to change somebody else's mind? I mean, in this environment right now, Facebook, whatever else, are you going to change somebody else's mind? I mean, can you change the heart of man? No. Isn't he the only one who can do that in the first place? Then let's be like our master and let God deal with them as we obey these commands. We have a job to do, and we're getting in our own way by focusing on the nasty and the negative and getting back at it and preparing for it and securing ourselves instead of just doing the job of reaching the world. We have a problem obeying these commands. Not because we're afraid of what things can be done to us by people, but because we think we aren't wrong and everyone else is. Isn't that really the issue, Cain and Abel? Isn't it really the issue with all of us all the time? Is that our knee-jerk reaction is not, well, maybe I did it wrong. Our knee-jerk reaction in the flesh and our carnality and our first man is to think that we're not wrong and everybody else is. So Jesus supports his point with a exaggeration, a kind of a funny exaggeration if you look at it that way. Starting in verse 41, he says, and why beholdest thou the mote that is in thy brother's eye, like a flake or a speck, but perceivest not, you can't see, you're blind to the fact that you have a beam or a big log that is in thine own eye? Either how canst thou say to thy brother, brother, let me pull out the mote that is in thine eye, when thou thyself beholdest not the beam that is in thine own eye? He says, thou hypocrite. Oh, that hurts, but it is so true. Hypocrite. Cast out first the beam of thine own eye, and then shalt thou see clearly to pull the mote that is in thy brother's eye. Imagine how ridiculous you would look with a giant log protruding out of your eye. But imagine that you are oblivious to the problem. Instead of getting rid of the log, you were worried about someone else that had a tiny little flake in their eye, a speck that no one else could notice but you, and yet you have this log, this beam flying everywhere you're looking. It seems silly, but to Jesus, that's exactly what it is. It's silly. It's ridiculous. It's unreasonable how hypocrisy looks. They were supposed to be the clear-eyed givers of God's grace, just like we should be. The only way to do so is to humbly deal with your sin before we attempt to help a brother out. Well, how does that wrap up the rest of this context? I'm glad you asked. When it comes down to it, it's really hard to love your enemies, do good to them, pray for them. It's really hard to turn the cheek. It's really hard to give to people that you don't even know is going to give back or not. It's really hard to live the true disciple of Jesus life in this life if we don't first deal with our junk, our sin, our altars, our gods, our stuff. If not, we're going to be enraged like Cain was. It's not going our way. Others are getting blessed. It ain't fair. And here we go. Much like the world around us is doing right now. And much like the Pharisees of that day. All of the religiosity could produce nothing but bad fruit. The only reason for bad fruit, get a bad tree. See, 43 says, "For a good tree bringeth not forth a good tree brings forth not corrupt fruit, neither doth a corrupt tree bring forth good fruit. For every tree is known by his own fruit. For out of thorns men do gather figs, nor do bramble bush gather they grapes. So it's impossible to get the wrong thing out of the right thing. A good man out of the good treasure of his heart bringeth forth fruit which is good. An evil man out of the evil treasure of his heart bringeth forth fruit which is evil. For the abundance of the heart his mouth speaketh," quoting from Proverbs. A pure heart flowing over with love and devotion for Jesus produces all the attributes that we've read here in this text, the attributes of Christ. But a polluted heart, running over selfishness, gushing with jealousy, producing anger and bitterness, will inevitably rage, can't help itself, be unreasonably hypocritical and vengeful. God came in the form of a man, Jesus, for several reasons, one of which was to demonstrate for us who he really was. Who was Jesus? What would Jesus do? The truth of who God is was evaporated and twisted within the Jewish culture to that point. The ones who held the truth, Jesus accused them, they kept back the wise in the house of God and demanded extra things that weren't in the Bible. Jesus came to settle what that really looks like once and for all. They can see physically manifested what God expects. Today, people have their own take on who Jesus was, and they use him for political reasons or all kinds of weird stuff. And what would he do today if he were here? Well, most often they're wrong because they don't ever take an account of the Bible passages that actually say what he did, or they take those passages out of context to support their own stuff and interpret it with their bias to their own wishes or their present lifestyle. They try to make a Jesus that agrees with them and a Bible that agrees with them. And people fall for it because they don't really know their Bible. They've not been taught. Here in this text, Jesus is explaining who he is, how he operates in real life. Therefore, you and I, as his followers, should as well. You will see that Jesus demonstrated every one of these things mentioned in this text with precision every day of his earthly life. He even alludes to the fact that you should be as he is, and therefore the Father in verse 36. In verse 40, he says, you will be as he is, as his master, as he said, if he is your master, then you'll be as he is. That's convicting. Because if I claim that he is my master, he is my Lord, my sovereign, if I claim that he is my teacher and the one I follow, then wouldn't I be acting the way he acted? Eventually, this game of life will be over. What will remain after the game is through? Eternal things and eternal things only. Our interpersonal reactions and actions are being recorded right now. Those temporary moments are being eternalized and immortalized in heaven. Think about that. No matter how right we think we are, if we're not acting like our master, then we are hypocritical. The only question then that fits us today, are we acting like Jesus according to this text? Or are we acting like the world that killed him? Let's follow the admonition of the Bible, not just in this text, but in several others. Pray one for another. We're in this together. It's going to get harder. I, for one, don't want to be hypocritical. I want to see souls saved. I want to see his kingdom expanded, even if it's at the expense of my preferences, my likes and dislikes, my feelings, the physical nature of my life here on earth, or any inconvenience it can give me, because my treasure is in heaven. How about yours? I love you guys.